would you say?
David, I don't really know. All I know for a fact, if news reports are correct, and you never know if that's true either, that the OPEC, or the Saudis primarily, normally when you have a recession and the demand for oil drops and the price starts going down, in the past, the Saudis restrict their output. They cut back the production in order to reduce the fall in the price. So they protect the price by restricting output when the demand falls. That's their normal behavior. This time, this is not happening, apparently, if news reports are correct. But of course, I'm not connected to the oil industry and have no independent information about it. So if news reports are correct, for the first time, or for an unusual incident, the Saudis are not restricting output as the demand falls, and so the price is going down. Now, the effect of this, of course, is devastating for the American fracking industry. You might remember that in order to get fracking underway and give fracking companies the ability to override community concerns, homeowner concerns, to override people's concerns with surface water and groundwater. The industry promised 100 years of energy independence. In other words, they created this impression that the United States would no longer have any imported energy, that we would have a century of our own energy. And by making these kinds of claims and establishing this kind of attitude, they were able to override the real objections to fracking. Now, that all of that fracking started with a much higher oil price. The price falls down like it does. This industry doesn't pay. The costs are higher than the price, and so you could look at this as the Saudis were taken in by this propaganda. I've seen various reports from people who claim to be experts that at best there was 20 years of energy from fracking, not 100. Now, maybe the Saudis were taken in. They didn't want to lose their market, so they're just driving these companies into the ground. That's one explanation. Another explanation that people advance is that we've hired the Saudis to put the pressure on Russian revenues by driving down the price of oil, because the Russian economy is dependent in some ways on the sale of oil. And so if the price of oil is driven down, and generally all energy prices tend to move together, so maybe it also hurts their sales of natural gas. And so this is seen as an effort of the United States to hurt Russia's ability to resist the various U.S., NATO, EU pressures. I don't know what the answer is. The only fact we know is that for some reason the Saudis are not restricting output in order to protect the price.
Well, let's look at what is going to come, regardless of what the motivations were on this. Let's look at some of the immediate practical considerations that are going to come under fire here. As I talked about earlier, we've got this report from David Stockman's Contra Corner. Says, here comes Wall Street's latest toxic waste. He says oil-linked notes will blow up under $80, many of them. And so are you concerned about the derivatives market that's attached to oil prices?
Yes, a lot of people are, not just David. I think that is a possible explosive event for the banks, and it could be the reason that I think it's the Citibank chairman that's been pressing to overcome the part of the replacement legislation for Glass-Steagall that if they can get that repeal, it lets them have access to depositors' accounts in the event there are derivative problems.
Yes.
So that could be one of the reasons that the Citibank chairman is pressing to overturn this legislation because the legislation and get it off the entity that holds the consumer deposits.
That's correct. With Dodd-Frank, they were supposed to separate out those speculative investments away from their core banking business, which would be insured by FDIC deposits. And we've seen a lot of heavy lobbying by Diamond as well as by Citibank to get this in, and it looks like they got what they wanted. That's part of the budget deal that got rammed through by Boehner, and of course it's alienated even a lot of the Democrat base. They essentially have alienated their voters by giving this massive gift to the bankers, telling them we'll underwrite and insure your risky investments using the U.S. taxpayer.
So Elizabeth Warren wasn't able to block it. I know she was trying to block it.
Yeah, I think it's. I think the deal has gone through. I believe anyway. That's what they're trying to do, and whether that's gone through
or not, it's an indication that they themselves are worried about the oil derivatives. But there are all sorts of other derivatives.
Oh yeah,
any of them could blow up, and so what we see again is that 3 or 4 banks control the economic policy of the United States. And control the fate of all the rest of us.
Yeah, that's very true. We were talking about this in the last hour. This Michael Schneider went through and looked at how bad the week was last week in terms of economic metrics. And he pointed out the similarities to 2008. First, we had an oil crash, then we had a commodities crash, then we had junk bonds crashing, and then we had the stock market crashing. So all it takes when you've got this this derivatives market that now, by some people's estimate, is over $250 billion worldwide. When you've got an economy that is only worldwide GDP is only about what 60 trillion or whatever. When you've got that much speculation out there, that large derivatives market, that it just takes one part of it to explode, and that can essentially kind of create an economic avalanche, can it?
That's right. And remember now the recession at the end of 2007, this was caused by the exploding fraudulent financial instruments.
Yes.
This time around, it may be that a recession itself causes the financial instruments to explode. Because there's every indication that not only has there never been a recovery, the recovery is an illusion created by understating inflation, overstating GDP growth, overstating jobs, not counting discouraged workers as unemployed. The whole thing is an illusion, and it's shot to pieces by the facts. For example, the Federal Reserve, it's just done a survey, and they found that that half of 25-year-olds are back at home living with parents. They're either unemployed or the jobs they have are not sufficient to pay rent.
Yeah, and I think that the fantasy that we have recovered economically from 2008, I think that's really underscored by what happened with the pension plans and the fact that Democrats and Republicans told us in this budget bill that they're going to give corporations the ability to renegotiate their pension commitments. That's something that has always in the past been sacrosanct. And when you look at the fact that private companies who've made these pension commitments decades ago would now be paying them back with much cheaper dollars, the purchasing power has been eroded by the Federal Reserve. They're not even able to make that. What does that tell us?
Right. Of course, the theft of pensions goes back a long time. I think it started when Eastern Airlines was taken over. That's his name. And of course, they're already cutting back and reducing all the municipal workers' pensions.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host, and we have on the phone with us Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, one of the co-founders of Reaganomics, economist and author. And we're talking to him about what the outlook is. And I guess maybe, Dr. Roberts, we're coming to the end of the year. I'd like to kind of get your general forecast as to what lays ahead on your most recent essay on your site, paulcraigroberts.org. There's an article on the brink of war and economic collapse. And you say, on occasion, a reader will ask if I can give readers some good news. The answer is not unless I lie to you, like your government and the mainstream media do. So what's the bad news for next year?
Well, David, let's cut to the chase. Everything is based on lies. The economy is based on lies. And we now see both houses of Congress have passed resolutions that set the basis for Washington fighting the Russians to the death of the last Ukrainian soldier. We're clearly going to arm the Ukrainians and hope that they are involved in a war with Russia, because this would greatly embarrass Russia, who obviously would win the war and would be designated the aggressor, and this would be used to further isolate Russia from Europe. So this is pretty much predictable given the two resolutions from the House and the Senate. I think the Senate vote was unanimous, and the House vote was 411 to 10. So we see out of the entirety of the Congress, which I think is some 535 people, the Americans, people, succeeded in electing 10 intelligent people.
And that many? So, I mean, that's pretty optimistic.
So much for democracy. Yeah. Now, for the economy, as we were saying, when you have half of 25-year-olds, these are, for the most part, I think, college educated, having to live at home because they can't get employment, and you've got 30% of 30-year-olds living at home in their former childhood rooms with their parents, then clearly there's no economy. There's just no economy.
That's right. That's right. Nobody's able to create any wealth in their personal life.
And when you spent 2 decades moving the American economy offshore so that shareholders could enjoy the capital gains from the higher profits from the lower labor cost, and the executives of the corporations can enjoy multi-million-dollar bonuses from the higher profits from the lower labor costs. So moving the jobs offshore, there's no economy here.
Yeah.
So we have a massive trade deficit that can't possibly be closed. And so the whole house of cards is standing on the dollar.
On the petrodollar. And I think that's a key thing, too, that we see as they're moving to, as we see the price of oil plummeting, as many people believe it's Saudi Arabia that is, as you point out earlier, they declined to cut production as prices dropped. So they're basically feeding into this decline. And the petrodollar is really one of the few things that we've got here, this fantasy that we've pushed on to the entire world, the petrodollar. And, of course, Putin is pushing with China and with India to try to go around the petrodollar. Once they do that, that's going to have tremendous impact for our standard of living, isn't it?
Yes, it's not just the petrodollar. It's the use of the dollar as world reserve currency. It has many other uses.
Right. But that's kind of the core of its reserve currency aspect. And, of course, as we talked about earlier, this is setting off a massive collapse of the derivatives market, which could cascade into the commodities, the stock markets, and that sort of, just as the Congress signs us up yet again to ensure the big bankers' speculations in the derivatives market.
Well, if they grab everybody's bank deposits and everybody's pensions and so forth, and the population here will starve. They won't have any money.
Yeah.
And so if they do that, they will provoke amazing social unrest, and as half the country is armed, the whole thing will blow up in their face. So I don't really know how stupid and foolish they will be.
There was kind of an interesting little side story that came up last